Here's a question likely to cause arguments at home. What is humankind's greatest achievement? The Age of Enlightenment? Music, perhaps? What about the Great Pyramid of Giza? Well, for many, it doesn't get any more glorious than the day Neil Armstrong stepped foot on the moon. This year marks the 50th anniversary of that remarkable feat of technology and daring. And while the moonwalkers, Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, dominate our memories of that event, there's a third astronaut who deserves his place in history. Michael Collins piloted the Apollo 11 command module in lunar orbit while the other two collected moon rocks. And as Sarah Abo reports, if it wasn't for him, one of our greatest successes would have been a monumental failure. Right now, 400 kilometres above Earth, 6 men and women are hurtling around the globe 16 times a day in the International Space Station.
And all you have to do is turn yourself and your reference changes.
Just to think it's possible is mind-blowing.
I am working on the NGX cancer trials up here.
It's an extraordinary existence for the astronauts who are working on more than 200 different experiments in space. But they need help back down on Earth.
Copy that. All previous science has been downloaded to ground and you are go to...
And it's here in Cologne, West Germany, that Andrea Boyd, a remarkable Aussie engineer, spends her days speaking with them from the European Space Agency's Mission Control.
Yep, that sounds like a plan to us, Alex. Many thanks.
No worries, mate.
Yeah, do they love talking to an Aussie?
They do, yeah. I have to say, a couple of the crews have tried to do a bit of an accent back to me, which is funny. Alex, who was just up there, would often put "no worries, mate" at the end of his calls to me. And yeah, he'd also add "good as gold" was one of his favourite phrases to say. It was great.
35-year-old Andrea always wanted a career in space. Luckily, in her lifetime, it's something that's been possible. But it wasn't that long ago that space exploration was still the stuff of science fiction.
Astronauts Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and then Mike Collins.
This year is the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11 blasting off to the moon. But in terms of technology, it feels like a millennia has passed. Back in July 1969, there were no such things as mobile phones, home computers, or even the internet.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
So, as Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first humans to ever walk on the moon, their extraordinary achievement turned the pair into instant worldwide heroes. But there was a third man on Apollo 11. Michael Collins didn't make headlines for stepping onto the moon, but he was the backbone of the mission.
Did I have the best seat on Apollo 11? No. Was I happy with the seat I did have? Yes, I really was. And to be any small part of that suited me very, very well. And besides, I was their ticket home. They couldn't get home without me.
So you had ultimately the biggest responsibility.
Yes, yes.
Michael is now 88, but age hasn't affected his razor-sharp mind and quick wit.
Sarah's camera.
She doesn't know who she is unless you do that to her? Okay.
We need to remind them constantly, Michael.
Okay.
Michael trained as a fighter pilot, but always dreamt of flying in space. Back then, it was still unknown who would make the best astronauts.
I mean, what sort of people should they be? Who should you select? And all sorts of crazy notions came out of the closets. For example, they said, well, there's no air up there, and mountain climbers are used to a very thin atmosphere, so we maybe ought to get mountain climbers. Other people said, well, it's dangerous. Maybe we ought to pick, bullfighters would be good.
During the lunar landing, while Neil and Buzz were picking up moon rocks, Michael's job was to stay on board the command module orbiting the moon.
Not since Adam has any human known such solitude as Mike Collins is experiencing during the 47 minutes of each lunar revolution when he's behind the moon.
You were orbiting on the far side of the moon in absolute pitch black, complete darkness.
Yeah, the food was terrible, but I enjoyed my time behind the moon. It's a more rugged place and not a very comfortable place.
Columbia, this is Houston, reading 11 clear over.
When you circled back to the bright side of the moon, what was Earth like?
Being very close to the moon was very impressive in many ways, but the moon is nothing compared to our home planet. It was it. It was center stage. It was any little thing, blue of the ocean, white of the clouds, little streaks of tan that we call continents. It's about the size of your thumbnail if you hold it out in front.
One of those streaks of tan was Australia.
We paid absolutely no attention whatsoever to Australia for 2/3 of the time. The other 1/3 of the time, Australia owned us. We needed Australia. You were our guidance. You were part of our flight because you had this gigantic antenna at Parkes.
Little old Australia, down under.
Down under, yes. We needed it badly. They were our source of information. They told us where we were. So Australia went to the moon with us in that regard.
Collector, I run into...
While Neil and Buzz definitely had the starring roles on the moon, Michael Collins had the most important job of all. He was tasked with bringing them safely home. And it all came down to a single tricky manoeuvre: redocking the lunar module. One wrong decision could have led to disaster.
That was the part of it that I worried the most about was if they didn't get off at all, I couldn't go and rescue them. I went home by myself. If they got off into some strange orbit, not the correct one, then I could come and rescue them sometimes, but not in other times. And I had around my neck on a little rope, a 8x10 notebook, which had inside it 18 different cases, possibilities.
And you had to be prepared for all of them.
Well, as best we could. I confess that of those 18, there were a couple that I thought were so far out they would not really ever happen, and I'm not sure I could have handled them. They were very complicated.
Thankfully, the reconnection was smooth and uneventful. But once back down on Earth, instead of being able to enjoy their hero status, the 3 astronauts were initially treated like aliens.
We were put into quarantine for 2 weeks. Some of our scientists were worried about the pathogens that we might have brought back from the moon. They possibly would be dangerous to humankind. So their solution to that was to put us inside a hermetically sealed container with a gigantic colony of white mice. The white mice lived, we were okay. White mice died, we were in deep trouble. Of course, I was checking on them. There were too many of them to give names to, but they became my friends. And
the mice survived.
The mice did beautifully, yes, thank you. Love those mice.
Half a century on from Apollo 11's groundbreaking mission, space travel is almost taken for granted.
So from Little Adelaide to Cologne and the International Space Station.
Yes, I definitely should have paid more attention to German in high school. I thought, when am I ever going to need this?
And people like Andrea Boyd have successfully made it their career.
When did you know that this is what you wanted to do?
Pretty early, I have to say. Star Trek came on, a new series, when I was about 10, and I watched that every week and adored it and learnt the word engineering. So I was like, all right, if I do engineering, one day I'll figure out how to do something with space.
7 years ago, Andrea landed the job of flight controller here at the European Space Agency's Mission Control.
So this is where the space magic happens.
Absolutely. So it's a very multinational collaborative environment here.
Are you the only Australian in Mission Control?
Yes, I am. Yeah, I didn't realise that until I arrived here. For the astronauts, it makes the accent more distinctive, and it's a fun inside joke between us.
It's her job to support the 6 astronauts living on the International Space Station, which has been orbiting Earth now for nearly 20 years.
So you're problem solving here on Earth for something that's happening in space?
Absolutely, it's the ultimate engineering.
I've seen them fit all of the astronauts in here, about 6 or 7.
Back in Cologne, they use this space station replica for training new astronauts.
So this is the astronaut's office?
That's right, so we've got the Japanese laboratory, the US laboratory.
And all of these are all attached, aren't they?
Yeah, it's very important in space. If you were to take this cap off, it would float away and you might not find it again. It's a very big space station, about the size of a 5-bedroom house, and 4 bedrooms worth of those are science laboratories. Just keep moving forward and it'll more or less dock.
I've missed it.
Back down again, yeah.
Ultimately, for this Aussie space junkie, the job allows her to do and see what the rest of us can only fantasise about.
You really have a window to the world, just from your desk here and to outer space.
Yeah, you can see just glorious views of the Earth as you're going over, and I always try and look up when we're flying over Australia as well, and you get to see around 16 sunrises and sunsets per day from the orbital laboratory too.
So what other secrets can you divulge to us Earthlings?
No, we don't really have secrets in space. Everything that we do on the space station is broadcast live on the internet 24/7. And anytime you hear an Aussie accent, it's me.
Much has changed since Michael Collins flew on Apollo 11. But the retired astronaut still keeps a keen eye on the future of space travel. And he says we need to think further, far beyond the moon.
So Mars has always been my destination, my favorite one, and and going back to the moon is certainly an interesting detour, but I would prefer that we set sail directly for Mars.
And that mission is really essential, in your view, for the future of humankind?
No.
Why do you think it's necessary then? Why do we need to go there, just to explore?
Flying in space is not necessary, I don't think. It's something that we have in us. We go out at night and we look up into the sky. We see things that we don't know what they are about. We are curious. We want to see infinity, and perhaps almost to visit infinity. To me, it's an intangible, but it's a part of being a human being, is this feeling of it's part of, it's there to see, to go, to see, to touch, to smell, to understand.
Hello, I'm Sarah Abo. Thanks for watching. To keep up with the latest from 60 Minutes Australia, make sure you subscribe to our channel. You can also download the 9Now app for full episodes and other exclusive 60 Minutes content.